Hi everybody!
So, we're apparently getting a PlayStation showcase later this month. No date has been announced for it, but you know what? Even if it doesn't happen, this video works anyways, as my predictions will more or less remain the same. But before we get into mine, I'd love to hear what your predictions are. Comment below. If you've been around my channel for any length of time, you'll know how much I despise Naughty Dog as they currently are. They've just been the disappointment of the PlayStation family in my eyes since the release of Uncharted 4. I've covered why I'm done with them in a separate video, a card for that will be popping up now. But a Cliff's Note version is, I just find under Neil Druckmann that Naughty Dog are committing the cardinal sin in gaming. Their titles just aren't fun.
Buddy, if I had $1 for every time your Damien Sandow wannabe ass mentions Naughty Dog in one of these videos, anytime you get a chance to, I'd be fucking rich.
What can I say? The unwashed masses need to hear that message. But back to my predictions, I think we'll see a brand new Naughty Dog game announced. I don't think it'll be anything related to the Uncharted games or The Last of Us though. Why do I think that? Mostly it's because you'd have to be a real idiot to not see that The Last of Us as an IP is pretty much a toxic asset at present, the TV show notwithstanding. But as a gaming IP, it's in a bad spot. Longtime Naughty Dog fans like myself won't want to touch it. A lot of hardcore gamers won't want to either because they're as done with Naughty Dog as I am. The only ones who'd support a new game from the Last of Us franchise would be diehard Druckmann fans or full-blown Sony ponies. As for why I don't think it'll be anything Uncharted related, it mostly comes down to there being no real need for another Uncharted game. When the series was at its pinnacle in the mid-2000s and early 2010s, it was capturing something special. That was mostly because there were just so few cinematic action-adventure games out there. Now those are a dime a dozen, mostly thanks to Sony oversaturating the market. I've covered why Sony need to diversify their gaming lineup in a previous video, so check that out when you're done with this video, as I think you'll find a newfound appreciation for some of my predictions after seeing it. So if they aren't making a new Uncharted game or The Last of Us game, what do I think Naughty Dog is cooking up? I think there's a real possibility we might see a brand new Jak and Daxter game, albeit not utilizing the continuity established during the PS2 days. At one point, Naughty Dog were considering a reboot of the franchise, which they discarded down the line. Also, members of the staff have noted they would like to revisit the franchise someday. Now might actually be the perfect time to bring it back. It'd be a goodwill gesture on Naughty Dog's part, since it'd possibly bring back a few people who hate Naughty Dog's current offerings. Also, a new game or a reboot of the Jak franchise would give Sony something their current roster of games lacks, beyond Ratchet & Clank or Astro Bot. It'd give the brand a kid-friendly IP, which could be an on-ramp for the newest generation of gamers. Because let's be real,
I'm old, Gandalf.
Basically applies to the majority of PlayStation gamers. A good majority of them are 30 plus. Much like the PS1 needed a kid-friendly game to inject young blood into the ecosystem during 1996 when the first Crash Bandicoot game came to the system, Sony finds themselves in a similar situation. The brand needs more youth injected into it. Plus, a new Jak game would set Naughty Dog up nicely going forward, since they could target a younger audience with that, a teenage to 20-something demographic with Uncharted, and the edgelord teens and grumpy old fucks with something like The Last of Us. Plus, I've covered this in a separate video. The video game industry is changing. AAA games, as we know them, are no longer sustainable because they just take too damn long to produce, and operate on such razor-thin profit margins that smaller experiences are needed to shore up the in-between times. Again, by having a triple-headed approach to things, Naughty Dog could set themselves up nicely. Have the Jak games be lower to mid-budget and release them bi-yearly, then have a bigger budget release in between. Yeah, it'd require more teams, but that would ultimately be a good thing, as it'd mean more games out in the market. If it isn't a new Jak game, I could see Naughty Dog launching a brand new IP. What setting it might have, I have no clue, but similar principles could be applied to the new IP as I just applied to the Jak idea. Long story short, I think we're getting something from the developer that's in my doghouse. Consider hitting the subscribe button if they're also in your doghouse, or if you'd like to see them do something new this generation. But either way, I think this one is very likely to happen. The vehicle combat genre is basically a dead one at this point in time. It was never a genre with a particularly large pool of players. You pretty much had Twisted Metal, then some Twisted Metal clones, and that's pretty much it. With the TV series renewed for a second season and the numbers for that doing pretty well, I think it's safe to assume Sony will bring back this car brawler. Albeit, I think this is probably one of the least likely predictions from this list to happen. The Twisted Metal community is very small, but very vocal. So if Sony were to bring this PlayStation icon back, it'd be to appease the very old fans more than anything else, given these games don't exactly have mass appeal. But the thing is, games don't have to appeal to everyone. Some of the best gaming experiences of my life came about because of games that appeal to a very tiny demographic. Those games were so good and so memorable because they said fuck the normies, we're catering to gamers who actually enjoy something different, and not your overdone third-person, over-the-shoulder action game. Again, this is something the current PlayStation portfolio lacks. The weird and wonderful days of PS1, 2, and 3 are long gone. At this point, most of the PlayStation offerings are rather cookie-cutter, and the most unique experience on the platform that isn't a cinematic game is Gran Turismo, a franchise that has never catered to the hyper-casual. In fact, that series has always been more catered towards the car enthusiast, as it's the premier car racing sim on console, though Forza is a great experience as well. But either way, Twisted Metal would be a great addition to the lineup. It'd be a more niche game, it'd shut up long-term fans of PlayStation, and on top of that, it could even become an esport in its own right, just like fighting games. I was watching a couple of documentaries on the Twisted Metal series, and a few of the creators in those documentaries noted some of the early games even had fighting game inputs, so that's pretty cool. On top of that, if PlayStation had their own esports title, they could bring in a brand new audience entirely. It's something they tried a little bit with Foam Stars, which failed, albeit that's because Sony tried way too hard to pivot hard into games as a service model during the final days under Jim Ryan's tenure. Speaking of, this kind of segues into my next prediction, which will be a shorter one. When I was originally writing this script, I was going to promote a podcast I did with John McBaugh that'll never get released now as it's outdated. In that podcast, we had a discussion on who we'd like to see as the next CEO of PlayStation. I personally went with Mark Cerny, and he picked Herman Hulst. Hulst will be co-CEO with Hideaki Nishino. If I butchered that name, I apologize. I'm just a weeb who can't speak Japanese. Previously, Nishino was in charge of the Platform Experience Group, so basically developing experiences and technology within the products and services Sony offer their end user. Nishino will basically continue to do that, while also being responsible for relations with third-party developers and publishers. A little teaser for you, I've got a video in the works about how third-party exclusives still matter. Hulst will continue doing what he was doing previously, whilst also overseeing first-party content. So since we now know who will be in charge of what, I imagine this showcase will partially be to discuss what the shared vision from these two men are. I get the feeling we're about to see a lot of projects get announced that would have never been greenlit under the much more conservative Jim Ryan. I also think we'll see PlayStation return to what they used to be, a platform where experimentation was rewarded, even if it didn't necessarily lead to the next big thing in gaming. And this has me super excited to see where the PS5 is going to go in the future. What do you think these two will bring to the table? Let me know in the comments. Sucker Punch Productions have been insanely quiet since releasing Ghost of Tsushima in 2020. On average, big-budget AAA releases take between 3 to 5 years to make, so 4 years is within the wheelhouse to at least hear something. Then again, Sucker Punch typically take their time with games. Since they opened their doors in 1997, the studio has only released a total of 8 games and 3 expansions. Basically, they're slow workers. But the quality really shines through in their work. So I imagine we'll see something from them. Some have stated it'll be a Ghost of Tsushima sequel. I'm less sure on that one, given Ghost had a pretty self-contained ending that doesn't exactly lend itself to a sequel. I think a remake of the first Infamous game or a brand new project in that franchise is more likely. Why do I think that though? For one, we don't exactly have full backwards compatibility between PS3 and PS5. Some games work sure, but you have to be a member of the higher tiers of PlayStation Plus, which not a lot of people are going to engage with, mainly because it's so cost prohibitive. The first Infamous game will also be 16 years old next year. Also, even though it looked great for the time, the first game hasn't aged as gracefully as a lot of people would want it to. Also, with ray tracing being a thing on the PS5, games that actually make use of light in any manner really benefit from it. Also, since Cole McGrath from the first game used lightning as his power, he'd really benefit from the ray tracing. Also, Sucker Punch could really provide commentary on the superhero genre, which is super oversaturated in films right now. With this game, I've covered how Sucker Punch could deconstruct the superhero genre in greater detail in my video on why Infamous should come back. If you're interested, a card will be popping up for that one now. Okay, so if it isn't Infamous, what can I see Sucker Punch working on? Glad you asked. I could see them working on a brand new Sly Cooper game. I'm presently working on a video about why Sly Cooper should make a return. So, if this video can reach 40 likes, I'll prioritize releasing that video ahead of some of my others. I could see Sucker Punch attempt a brand new IP. Since being brought into the PlayStation fold, Sucker Punch have always had one new IP per generation. With PS2, it was Sly Cooper. With PS3, it was Infamous. And with PS4, it was Ghost of Tsushima. Of all of my mini predictions related to Sucker Punch, I think a new IP is the most likely to happen, followed by a new Sly Cooper game, with something Infamous related being the third most likely. Insomniac Games has just moved from strength to strength this generation. Obviously, some people didn't like Spider-Man 2 for their own reasons, which is fine. There was also the leak issue a while ago, but you can't deny what Insomniac have achieved this generation is incredibly fun. Miles Morales was a nice showcase of what was possible on PS5. Rift Apart really showed just how innovative developers could get with the M.2 drive, and Spider-Man 2 is a technical showcase. We know some of what to expect from the leaks, so I imagine some of that will be shown off at the next showcase. Since Insomniac is the reverse of Sucker Punch Productions, they work fast, so I imagine we'll see Spider-Man 2 DLC at minimum, and more than likely see our first real slice of gameplay from Wolverine, which I imagine will be out very early into next year, since we know there will be no first-party exclusives from Sony this year. But I also think we'll see the next Ratchet & Clank game shown off, and whatever the multiplayer project Insomniac was hiring for a while back. I covered what that could be in a separate video, and a card will be popping up now. I have also speculated in the past Insomniac is going to revisit the Resistance series at some point. I would say given the game will be 20 years old in just 2 years, and the fact they were hiring for a multiplayer project not long ago points to a Resistance reboot. It would really be a great addition to the PlayStation lineup, and back when the PS5 first launched, Sony said the PS5 was going to be a celebration of the brand. We haven't exactly seen that yet. I've also covered in a previous video how Resistance could make a return. Check that video out if you're interested. But one can't deny the fact Resistance would, just like Twisted Metal, fill a void in the current library of games. It's a literal goldmine. Just don't market it as the Halo killer again, and the game will do well. Then again, is Halo even relevant anymore? Love them or hate them, the Horizon games are some of the biggest sellers for the PlayStation right now. There have also been rumors of a Horizon MMO RPG, so it wouldn't surprise me if Guerrilla Games has something to showcase. It wouldn't surprise me if it's Killzone related and not Horizon. That series really needs a rest. Plus, PlayStation really lacks a first-person shooter to lean on at present. They also have an unnamed Horizon project in the works, so I'd say there's a good chance we see them announce that officially. At minimum, we'll hear something about what Guerrilla is working on, but I'm not too confident it'll be anything beyond a teaser trailer. The PS5 Pro is long rumored, and honestly, I don't think it's going to happen, even though the specs have reportedly leaked. The reason I don't think it happens comes down to the fact it makes very little sense. The PS5 doesn't exactly struggle with games at present, as very few have been built for modern hardware. Most are still targeting last generation machines, even though we're 4 years into this generation already. Also, the PS4 Pro made up less than 1/3 of the total PS4 sales, so it's not like they were selling in high volumes. The PS5 is already a fairly expensive machine, and a Pro model would be all the more expensive, so it would really be a flop sales-wise. In the long term, it would probably cost Sony way too much money to produce one, and they wouldn't see enough sales to make it a worthwhile venture. Now, if the PS5 is planned to be the lead console well into the 2030s, then that would make some sense, as the base PS5 would really be struggling at that point. But considering the PS5 right now is still really close to most mid-budget rigs, it makes very minimal sense to release a Pro model. I just don't see it happening. If it happens, you can feel free to roast me in the comments. At this point, new colors seem to release for the DualSense fairly frequently. The same can't be said of the Edge model, which is PlayStation's first attempt at the Pro controller market, so it really wouldn't surprise me if we see new colors for both. So far, the primary PS5 controllers have been themed around space, metals, or nature to some degree, so I could see Sony announcing a new line of colors for the mainline DualSense and reissuing the first wave of colors for the Edge. I recently reviewed the Hori Fighting Commander Octa, and a card will be popping up on screen for that one, so if you want to see me do more videos like that, sound off in the comments. When I can, I'll purchase and review the DualSense Edge. But what colors would you like to see for both sets of controllers? As you can probably tell from the thumbnail of this video, Astro Bot is kind of the new mascot for PlayStation. There's a lot they could do with the series. We've already had a VR game for the PS4, and the game which ships with every PS5. Admittedly, Japan's studio was closed, but they were reorganized into Team Asobi, so they still sort of exist. I imagine they have some kind of Astro Bot project in the works. What it'll be, I have no idea, but I think they should stick with the 3D collectathon platformer. That's a genre that is really underserved at this point in time, so even moderately competent ones stand out. Astro's Playroom was an amazing example of one, despite it being exceptionally short. They don't have to go with that genre, of course, since the character could be applied to almost anything, but a cutesy game is something Astro lends well to. Like I mentioned with Jack earlier in the video, PlayStation needs an IP that can bring in new blood. Astro is probably the bot to get the job done. If they don't want to go the platformer route, they could go with a Zelda clone. There's really a lot they could do with this one. Let me know what you'd like to see. BluePoint Games was acquired shortly after the launch of the PS5. They've kind of built a name for themselves off of developing games that are remasters or remakes of existing IPs. Their last game was, of course, 2020's Demon's Souls remake, which launched to critical acclaim. Rumors have indicated BluePoint are working on a wholly new project. Rumors have also been flying about them doing a Metal Gear Solid remake. That very well could be in the works, though I somehow doubt it. I think BluePoint will be releasing something that is entirely their own idea. They haven't made a game that's wholly their own since 2006's Blast Factor, which is notable for being the first game running at 1080p and 60 frames per second on the PS3. It was also one of the first digital-only games on the PS3. I, for one, am super excited for what BluePoint is working on. I have the feeling they're going to do either an action-adventure title, or they're going to do a Souls-like game that is their own IP. A lot have speculated it'll be a Bloodborne sequel, so maybe that's it. I wouldn't be surprised if they do a Bloodborne sequel in the future, but I think this is a different project. I think a Souls-like is probable given they did so well with Demon's Souls. Because of that game, they likely have assets they could reuse if they wanted to go for a gothic medieval setting. The HUDs are always similar in Souls-like games, so they just have to change the aesthetics of that a little bit. Maybe it'll be a Demon's Souls 2, since Dark Souls was the spiritual successor. That would technically make it a brand new project, but I'll be honest, I think Souls-likes are starting to become oversaturated. Do you think Souls-likes are becoming too commonplace, or do you think they're here to stay? So those were my 10 predictions for the next PlayStation Showcase. I'd love to hear your predictions though. Thanks go out to my current channel members, R. Campbell and Danny Boy. If you'd like to help the channel out further, get exclusive content and early access to videos, you can do so by hitting the join button or the link in the description. If you found this video useful, check out my video on why PlayStation needs to diversify its gaming portfolio. Until next time, keep blazing that trail.